everyone, welcome back and thanks for joining me. I'm your host Sherry and you are tuned in to the dark side. Today we're talking about a young lady whose life was tragically taken from her when she was just 21 years old. One thing I want to point out before we get started is that I'll be mentioning towns in Pennsylvania and New Jersey locations. Just keep in mind these places are only about 10 minutes from one another. You can be in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and then in New Jersey in just a few miles. Here on the East Coast, we have Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, super close to one another. We're like a small cluster of states. As always, my sources are listed in the description area. This is episode 113, The Case of Rachel Siani. This story took place in 2000. The first residential crew entered the International Space Station. There was the big Florida recount. Basically, George Bush couldn't be declared president until all the ballots were recounted. It was on the news like every night. The PlayStation 2 was released in Japan. Everyone's favorite comic strip, Peanuts, made its final appearance in newspapers. This was just one day after the creator Charles Schulz passed away. The average income was $40,000. And lastly, this was the last of the normal years. Just 1 year later, planes would crash into the U.S. as a result of a terrorist attack. Our world was never the same again in terms of security. I really missed the year 2000. On April 1st, 2000, a man named Richard Scott was out riding around in Burlington County, New Jersey on his four-wheeler. He rides under the Delaware River Turnpike Bridge. The bridge is a huge arch bridge that connects Bristol, Pennsylvania to Burlington County, New Jersey. It goes over the Delaware River. He sees something near the river in the grass. It looks like a mannequin laying face down in the grass. As he gets closer, he realizes this is no mannequin. This is the body of a pretty young woman. She is wearing jeans and a white sweater and socks. The police arrive and realize that she must have jumped from the bridge 112 feet in the air in an attempt to commit suicide, except she didn't make it in the water. Instead, she landed in the grass. She hit the ground so hard that she left a 10-inch indent in the ground. What police uncover shows this likely wasn't a suicide at all. Rachel Siani was born April 18, 1978. She grew up in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother passed away a few years later. At the time of our story in 2000, Rachel is 21 years old. She is living with her dad, Richard, and her stepmom, Janet. She also has two brothers and two stepbrothers. Rachel is a college student at Bucks County Community College, where she is working towards her associate's degree in psychology. She also took acting classes and loved to be on stage. Rachel is so close to this associate's degree. She has 57 out of 60 credits. She's literally right at the end. She had plans once she finished to attend a 4-year college and get a degree in music therapy. Rachel does what some young women choose to do. Her family isn't paying for her schooling. Rachel has to fund it herself. She is able to pay for her school and live comfortably by working as a dancer at Divas International Gentlemen's Club. It's a strip club in Levittown, Pennsylvania. Rachel made excellent money doing this. She worked 3 to 5 nights a week and brought home around $400 each night, which is great, especially back in 2000. Today in 2024, it's equivalent to $725 each night. She's making way more doing this than waitressing tables and other jobs that her friends at college are doing. Rachel's hours were 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. The other dancers said Rachel was very quiet. She didn't talk a lot, but she was always friendly. This was more of a scandalous profession back in 2000. Nowadays, there isn't nearly the stigma as there was back then, and thank goodness we're progressing finally. Rachel didn't initially tell her dad and stepmom that she was working as a topless dancer. They found out from someone else, which is like the worst way they could have found out. Her dad was not okay with this. He hated that she was dancing, but also knew she was an adult now and could do whatever she wanted. Rachel told her dad this was just a temporary thing. Once she graduated, she'd be able to get a job as a therapist or something with her new psychology degree. Rachel had the stage name Foxy Roxy, and she had her regulars at the club, but there was one guy in particular, a man by the name of John DeNofa. He goes by the name Jack. Jack is 35 years old, and he's been a regular there for the last year and a half or so, and he loved watching Rachel dance, and he paid very well. Other regulars were tipping the girls with $1 bills, but Jack tipped in 20s. He was also known to take dancers out to dinner and often bought them drinks. I've heard varying reports. I hear that everyone at the club liked Jack. He never requested private lap dances. He just watched the girls dance and he paid well. He wasn't one of those guys that try to touch the dancers without consent, but I've also heard that he would occasionally get so drunk that he would become belligerent and would act out. One dancer said Jack would sometimes test the dancers to see if they trusted him. He would ask one to let him hold all her tips throughout the night. If they did it, at the end of the night, he would give them double their money. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, yeah, it's cool they got back double the amount, but it almost feels like he needs to be in control at all times. I don't know. They also said Jack would get pissy if one of the dancers didn't approach him right away. If that happened, he would ignore that dancer for weeks. To me, he seems like the type that feels like they all owe him something. With Rachel, it got to the point that she didn't even have to dance when Jack was there. He would come in and sit down with her, and they would just talk. Sometimes this went on for hours, even after her shift ended. All the while, he's paying her well to keep the conversation going. He just keeps pulling out 20s every few minutes, and she just keeps on talking with him. Rachel was likely using these conversations to practice her psychology and therapist skills. Rachel told the other dancers he was harmless and friendly. Now, Jack wasn't some lonely guy with no friends. Jack is 35 years old, and he's married. He is the owner of Apex Sign Supplies. He lives in a large home and by all accounts is an upstanding citizen. He and his wife were part of hosting a neighborhood block party each year. They would all set up a tent canopy in their yards, and everyone said that his house had the biggest spread of food out of all of them. Many of you are probably wondering how he managed to keep his frequent weekly strip club trips a secret from his wife. Well, I learned in fact that there was no secret. Jack's wife was 100% okay with him going. In fact, she would drive him there, drop him off, tell him to have fun, and off she'd go. Jack had gotten a DUI 1 year prior to this story, so occasionally his wife would drive him so that he wouldn't have to drive after having a few drinks. Jack was known to get a hotel room close by, usually at the Econo Lodge, so he wouldn't have to go all the way back home. The Econo Lodge was right next to the bar, so it worked out well. Sometimes he'd meet a dancer at breakfast the next morning, and his wife would come join them, and they'd all sit down and eat breakfast together. As far as I can tell from my research, Jack was not sexually involved with any of the dancers, including Rachel. On March 31st, 2000, Rachel hadn't shown up for work, and her coworkers became concerned. One of them called police because it was so unusual for Rachel not to come to work, and she didn't call out or notify anyone she wasn't going to be there. The police go to her house and meet with her family, who reported they hadn't heard from her either. Police interview some of Rachel's coworkers, and they tell them that there was a guy who worked at Divas as a cook who was obsessed with Rachel. He had actually been fired a month before because he wouldn't leave her alone. He acted like they were in a relationship, and Rachel's like, "No, you're my coworker, and that's it." But he told people that she was his girlfriend. This man did end up getting ruled out, but it was odd to police his obsession with her. They realize he is definitely a strange character, but he's not responsible for her disappearance. More interviews take place with her coworkers, and they learn about what Rachel was up to the night before. According to case law, they tell police that Rachel worked her normal shift that night at Divas. Then afterwards, she changed into a pair of jeans, a white sweater, and she put on a necklace with a butterfly charm. They said Rachel at some point was seated with Jack at the bar. He invited her to go over to another bar called Sportsters, and she declined. Jack and Rachel left separately. Jack checked into the Econo Lodge next door and got a room. Then he took a cab to this other bar called Sportsters. A friend from that bar drove him back to Divas around 2 o'clock a.m., but Divas was closing. It was at this time that Rachel had returned to Divas. She said she wanted to hang out with one of the guys there who was a DJ, but he wasn't around when she got there. Rachel and another dancer sat in a car in the parking lot and smoked pot and talked for a while. This other dancer snapped a photo of Rachel sitting in the passenger seat. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's the photo on the right of your screen. While they're sitting in the car talking, they spot Jack DeNofa. He's outside and banging on the club's doors to let him in. He's visibly intoxicated and just being an ass. The bouncers are telling him, "No, it's late, we're closed, go home and come back tomorrow, Jack." Rachel gets out of the car and goes over to him and offers to walk him over to his motel room at the Econo Lodge. This other dancer that Rachel's been hanging out with is like, "Are you sure this is something you want to do? Do you need me to wait here or anything?" And Rachel says no, she'll be okay. Jack's a good dude. A police officer who had been patrolling in the area said he saw a man and a woman walking towards the door of a hotel room. He didn't think anything of it. He figured the guy was a patron at the strip club and one of the dancers wanted to sleep with him. These kind of things happen. It's nothing to be super concerned about. But that wasn't the case at all. Rachel was just being a nice person and helping him to his motel room since he was too drunk. This is the last time anyone saw Rachel alive. The police head to this motel room, which is room number 223. They get a search warrant, and in the shower, they find a trace amount of blood. It wasn't enough to do a DNA test on. The hotel clerk said she saw Jack, accompanied by a young woman, arrive at the room, but she never saw the girl leave. Police interviewed Jack, and he says he last saw her when she walked him to his motel room. He says she never went in. Instead, she just said goodnight and left. Just a day later, an ATV rider named Richard Scott was out riding around Burlington County and stumbled upon the body of a young woman. Police initially believed that she jumped off the bridge to commit suicide, but instead of landing in the water, she hit the grass instead. The bridge was around 112 feet in the air. This was a long fall. She doesn't have any ID on her, just a white sweater, jeans, socks, and a necklace with a butterfly charm on it. She has blood on her face and 2 broken fingernails, which indicated this woman was fighting back against someone. They could also tell by her eyes, because they were bulging, that this lady was strangled at some point in her last few hours. The media releases a photo of the butterfly necklace in hopes that someone would recognize it. An ex-boyfriend of Rachel's was watching the news and he recognized it. He called them and told them that the butterfly necklace belongs to Rachel Siani. They run the name and see that Rachel is reported missing, and they have no doubt that this is her, especially when shown a photo of her. They quickly learn that this is not a suicide. While examining the scene, investigators find blood on the bridge near the handrail and on the side retaining wall. There was also white fibers from her sweater on the railing. But what stood out most to these investigators was the fact that the bottoms of Rachel's socks were very clean. They were pure white. This indicates that she wasn't walking on the bridge in her socks and then she jumped off. This indicates she was taken to that spot, then carried and thrown over the bridge. Her feet never touched the ground. Meanwhile, police are still investigating at this motel room. They see Jack had a 1996 red Dodge pickup truck according to the motel registration. Investigators know that if Jack was the one that brought her to the bridge, his truck would be on camera. So the bridge has a surveillance camera at the toll booth that shows every car that comes on that bridge, and it was recording all night long. Police scour through the footage, and they see at the 3:12 a.m. timestamp, there is a red Dodge truck entering the bridge. They can't make out the license plate, but they see in the bed of the truck, there is a human body wearing a white sweater and jeans. It's curled into a fetal position. A truck driver would come forward saying that he saw what appeared to be a body in the back of a red truck while he was crossing over that bridge, but he thought it was just somebody passed out drunk and getting a ride. 25 minutes later, the camera shows that same truck coming back in the opposite direction. This time, the bed of the truck was empty. Meanwhile, back at the motel, they find Rachel's blood on the sidewalk underneath the balcony where Jack's room was. This is odd, and this isn't just a little bit of blood. It was approximately 30 inches by 5 inches. They spoke to the guest who was staying right below Jack, and he claims that that night he heard a loud bang sometime between midnight and 3 a.m., but didn't come outside to check it out. Police believe that this was Jack throwing Rachel off the balcony. He then placed her in the back of his truck, drove her to the bridge, and threw her over. How no one saw a man pulled over and throwing someone over a bridge is unknown. This is a busy highway. The medical examiner determined that Rachel died of blunt force trauma, but she was still alive until the moment she hit the ground after being thrown off the bridge. He could tell because she had internal bleeding, and I'll get to that soon. This means Rachel survived being strangled, she survived being thrown off the motel balcony, she was alive the entire time she was in the back of that truck, and she was alive while being thrown off the bridge. The whole night is just horrific. The reason it's so important about where she was killed was because if she died after being strangled and tossed from a 2-story motel balcony in Pennsylvania, then that is a Pennsylvania murder. If she died after being thrown from the New Jersey side of the bridge, that is a New Jersey murder. Lots of talks about jurisdiction in this one. What gets me is the blood that was found on the other side of the handrail of the Delaware River Bridge. Was she fighting not to go over? It seems like she was critically injured while in the back of that truck. If not, she would have jumped out or flagged someone down rather than just laying there in the fetal position. If she was critically injured, she was likely in a coma when thrown off the bridge, but I didn't understand why her blood was on the side of the retaining wall. Detectives go to Jack's truck and find it had been recently cleaned, including the bed. This truck was so clean it looked brand new. However, he forgot to remove the bed liner. Underneath the bed liner, there was a surplus of blood found that was a match to Rachel. This is 100% solid evidence. Jack is placed under arrest for the murder of Rachel Siani. Jack maintains his innocence. He says he last saw Rachel when she walked him the short distance from Divas to the Econo Lodge Motel. He says someone else must have taken his truck that night. He said that sometimes the bouncers at Divas would take his keys from him and hold them so he didn't try to drive intoxicated. He believes someone took his truck and they are Rachel's killer. What detectives and eventually the prosecution believe happened is that he was drunk and angry that the bar was closed. Rachel escorted Jack to his room at the Econo Lodge. He tried to make some sexual advances towards her and she declined. He got upset and began strangling and beating her. He strangled her to the point where she passed out. He placed her out on the balcony and laid her against the railing. By doing this, her body went over the rail and hit the sidewalk. He then ran out and down the steps. He threw her in the bed of his truck, then drove to the Delaware River Bridge where he tossed her body over it. He didn't realize that there was grass under that. He thought that she was going to land in the water. Rachel was thrown off the bridge while she was still alive. She landed face first in the ground, and the impact was so hard that she left a 10-inch indent into the earth. Jack is going to go on trial. The New Jersey medical examiner, Dr. Presswala, had a very impactful testimony. He said that his opinion was that Rachel sustained a near-fatal blow to the head when thrown over the motel balcony. He could tell from her liver that she was alive between that fall and the next one. He gave a very detailed analysis about this that I really didn't understand since I'm not a medical professional, nor do I have any medical background whatsoever. But the short version is that she still had blood pressure, which was still pumping blood. When you're dead, you don't have blood pressure. Rachel's liver was lacerated, which caused internal bleeding. In 2002, Jack was convicted of Rachel's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, but only after 30 years. Jack's mother-in-law even testified that he was a good man who wouldn't have hurt that girl. Jack has filed so many appeals. He says, quote, "I am not a murderer. I have been wrongly convicted. I grieve for Rachel and her loved ones. I pray every day that her killer will be found." Jack, believe it or not, had his conviction overturned in 2005 by the New Jersey Superior Court. According to case law, they overturned the conviction because the trial court did not require a jury finding that the murder was committed in New Jersey. But this victory was short-lived because 1 year later, in 2006, the conviction was reinstated and Jack was sent back to the state prison to finish his life sentence. The prosecutor in this case, Bob Bernardo, said, "We still don't know whether Jack was having any kind of sexual relationship with Rachel. I don't think he was. And I still think something may have happened in that hotel room where he came on to her and she blew him off, and that infuriated him." In 2013, Jack filed a writ of habeas corpus petition in federal court. This is when a person proclaims that they are being unlawfully detained or imprisoned. Jack claims he is 100% innocent and he is being wrongfully imprisoned. His claim was denied in 2017. Jack is currently serving a life sentence at New Jersey State Prison. He is eligible for parole in August of 2032. Rachel's family has spoken out about the bias in the reporting of this case. The headlines read things like, "Stripper found dead." Why didn't they say college student found dead or 21-year-old woman found dead? Why do you have to say what her occupation was except to grab headlines? You can actually see the image of Rachel in the back of his truck. Just do a Google image search for Rachel Siani truck. You'll also see footage of the truck coming back in the opposite direction and the bed is empty. Just keep in mind that this surveillance footage is from 2000. It's not as high def as it is today. There was also an episode of Forensic Files about this case called Last Dance. I watched it a couple years ago, but something I remember distinctly from this episode was that the family spokesperson in the show was Rachel's cousin. She talked about growing up with Rachel and how much she has missed. She was wearing a necklace with a butterfly pendant on it. I'm hoping that it was Rachel's necklace because that would be a really nice thing to do and a way to keep her memory alive. If alive today, Rachel would be 46 years old. She would likely have had years of working in the music therapy field. Her dancing days would have been long behind her, ones that she would look back on and remember that she needed to do in order to pay for college. Rest in peace to the girl with the $1 million smile. Rachel Siani, I am so sorry that this happened to you, and I hope you are resting in peace knowing your killer is behind bars where he will hopefully stay for the rest of his life. That's it for this week, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care, and much love to you all. Intro music is Feral Angel Waltz, which is composed by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons. All his music can be found on his website, incompetech.com.